So in this video I'm going to show you how to do this X stitch, and I've paired it up with just a plain row of double crochet or UK treble. So I've used a 4mm hook and some 100% merino wool. I'll put a link to that in the comments. So one of the key things to know about this stitch pattern is that it's a 3-stitch pattern repeat. So each one of these X stitches uses 1, 2, 3 stitches, and then you need a stitch at each end as well, so that's 2, so it will be 3 plus 2. So for the purpose of this swatch, I'm making a swatch with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 X stitches, so that will be 7 times 3 is 21, plus the 2, 1 on each end, will give us 23. So we need to start with 23 stitches if you want to have a go at making this stitch. So this swatch has been washed and blocked, so you can see it's actually got a really nice drape. In the video, obviously it's pre-washing and blocking, and of course this is one of the beauties of using natural fibres, that the behaviour of the fabric often changes in a really positive way after it's been washed and blocked. Let's start. I'm going to do a chain 6. And then you're going to turn the work to the other side. And you're going to yarn over or yarn round hook 3 times. You are not going to go into the first stitch because that's already taken up by that first chain 6 representing a stitch, but you're going to go into the second stitch and you're going to pull up a loop. So make sure you get the chain out of the way. You should have 5 loops on the hook. Yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2. Yarn over again, skip a stitch into the next stitch, put the hook into the next stitch, pull up a loop, and again you've got 5, and you're going to yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2. You're left with 3. So as you can see, we've made the bottom 2 legs of that cross stitch or X stitch. Yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2. We've made the top right hand leg of that stitch. Chain 1, yarn over, and now you're going to do a double crochet or UK treble. And what you're going to do is you're going to follow up this first leg that you made and this loop here where it comes to a point with the loop from the other stitch. That's where you're going to put your hook in. Notice how I'm going from right to left. I'm going to pull up a loop, I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to draw off 2. So basically I've put a double or UK treble into those legs of that, the parts of that stitch. So then that is your first cross stitch or X stitch, or let me know what you call that. Okay, so in this particular stitch sequence, because I'm not increasing, I'm going straight into making another X stitch. So yarn over 3 times, into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over again, skip a stitch, into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2, and then yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2 again to make the top right hand part of that stitch. Chain 1, yarn over and put a double crochet through the legs of those stitches where they converge from right to left, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2. So I've made the second one. So I'll just give you a few tips as well, troubleshooting. If you find that your crosses are a little bit wonky, so they will tend to lean one way, and that's just the nature of crochet. It always tends to lean in one direction. But if you're finding that the legs on the left hand side of the cross shape are shorter that's because you're not pulling up enough of a loop. So this first one here will naturally be the longest if you don't make any adjustments, and then this one here on the right will also be a little bit longer. So I'll do another one. So yarn over 3 times into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, skip a stitch into the next stitch. Now notice how I'm pulling up a slightly longer loop there before I do my yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2, and then that way it matches that other stitch that I've started off on this side. And then yarn over, draw off 2, yarn over, draw off 2 for the top right hand leg of that stitch, chain 1, yarn over, and then this one that goes through the 2 strands there in the middle, when I pull up the loop for that one, I'm also pulling up a slightly longer loop. So the key with those pulling up the extra loops, and also with this, the first step where you do the 3 yarn overs to keep everything really neat, is that this first loop on your hook, the live loop, you must try and keep that tight on the hook to keep everything neat. So I'll show you what happens if you don't. So I'm exaggerating here, but I have deliberately allowed this live loop to go way too baggy, and that is often what happens with people when they're making these longer stitches. And then here on this one I'm going to deliberately not pull up the loop enough. This is another common thing I see when people are doing these longer stitches. This first loop they pull up, instead of giving it space, they literally, the minute it pops up, they're making the rest of the stitch. So, and then chain 1, and then I'm going to do this the same with that. I'm not giving that any space, just to demonstrate what happens. I'm literally, the minute it pops up, I'm yarning over and drawing off 2. So here you can see this stitch, although it's not difficult, it does need a certain level of finesse and control over what you're doing, because otherwise you could end up with stitches like this that are quite distorted. So this sloppy bit here, that's a result of this live loop on your hook. As you made the stitch, you allowed it to elongate, you didn't keep it true to hook size. These short bits are a result of not pulling up the loop enough as you make the left hand side of that cross stitch. So I know some people say, oh well, how do I elongate the stitch without making this one bigger? And it is quite a subtle thing, but what you want to do is, you're only, notice how I'm only tilting the hook this end up. I'm not doing it with the whole hook. I'm only elongating this strand. It's quite subtle. I'm not doing it with the whole hook, and actually that loop, that very first loop on your hook, the live loop, tends to get, the point it gets elongated is as you after your 3 yarn overs, when you first go in, put the hook into the stitch. There is quite a lot going on with this stitch, so there's quite a few opportunities to lose control of the live loop. But overall, once you've got into the rhythm, this is actually a pretty fast and easy stitch, and you know, not that difficult to memorize. As I said, I think it tends to look best with other stitches between it. You could try all kinds of different stitches, single crochets, double crochets, maybe some other kind of mesh stitch, but yeah, if you give it a go, let me know. And also, you know, what would you call this? Cross stitch, X stitch. So I'm coming up to the end of the row here, and at the end I'm going to do what in UK terms is called a quadruple treble, and in US terms is a triple treble. So I'm going to yarn over 4 times, and I'm going to go into my last stitch, and again keeping all these loops really nice and neat, especially this first one. Pull up a loop, yarn over, draw off 2, 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 yarn over, draw off 2. So drawing off in pairs. So then that is how we close off the end of that row. Okay, so next up I'm just going to show you how I did that double crochet row or UK treble row between those cross stitches. So I actually start off with a chain 2, which I do not count as a stitch, and then I turn the work round to the other side, and then I'm going to put 1 double into the first stitch. Then I'm going to put a double into, or UK treble, into the first part of that cross stitch. Next up I'm going to double into the chain 1 space. And now this is a point I do something slightly different. So instead of going into this next part of the X stitch like that, which leaves the back part of that stitch hanging in midair, I actually, instead of going into the stitch, I just go between the posts of that cross stitch, and it pulls up the third part of that stitch and stops it hanging down with that little loop. Next up, double crochet into the top of the next part of the X stitch, so that's literally front loop, back loop is normal, then into the space, then between the posts, into the next stitch, into the chain 1 space, between the posts. Okay, so for me that looks a bit neater, but obviously, you know, it's your crochet. If you prefer how it looks the other way, then feel free to do that. So I'm just going to go ahead, 1 in the stitch, 1 in the space, 1 between the legs, 1 in the stitch, 1 in the space, 1 between the legs. So with this, what I would say is quite important is just every time you do this double crochet row, or whatever you're putting between these cross stitches, maybe you're putting singles, maybe you're putting half doubles, whatever, what I would say is just always count your stitches at the end of the row. So here the last stitch must go into the top of the chain 6 that we made at the beginning of the previous row. 1 2 3 4 5 6. So it's actually always the next stitch to the left of the one you've just worked in, so you don't even need to count really from this side. So remember to treat the chain like a normal stitch, front loop, back loop. You don't want to work around the whole chain because it will leave a big hole. So I'm putting my last stitch in there. Oops, that was not very happy. So it should be looking like this. So I'm actually using merino wool. So once I've washed and blocked this, that will actually make quite a big difference and make it look super nice. That's the beauty of natural fibres as opposed to plastics such as acrylic. Okay, so that's it. Are you going to give it a go? What do you think? Have you made this stitch before? If you have a go, I love to see your work.